When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Warning: this show contains material that some listeners may find troubling, including discussions of intense horror movie themes, explicit language, movie spoilers, and women speaking. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, horror fans. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Eleanor.
And welcome to Horror Sandbox, the podcast where we dig around in horror films and see what we can unearth.
That's right. But before we get started today, Charlie, tell me how you are coping with the horrors.
So, I actually wanted to cope by talking about the podcast today because it's our 20th episode, which is nuts.
Bear, 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 bear.
And to add to that, this one's extra exciting because it's our first Patreon episode. So this is the one that our patrons over on Patreon voted for. And so it's been really fun to make this one. And I just want to say this podcast in general has been such a wild ride and I've enjoyed it so much. When Eleanor and I started this, we were planning on this to be like a totally casual, like maybe we'll post one episode every other week kind of thing, because like we have no background in podcasting. We don't have any network in the podcasting community. So we thought like, we're probably not going to get that much engagement, but why not give it a shot? But now, 20 episodes later, we have people in our comments like regularly. Like we have people that we chit chat with almost every episode and they send us DMs, and we have people supporting us on Patreon, and like we have full horror movie discussions with like people all around the world, and it's just so wild and fun to share this love of horror with so many people. And what we really like about it is discovering movies together and then helping you guys find movies that you might not have watched otherwise if we didn't do an episode on them. So we think that's so cool. Speaking of our Patreon, we got the idea for our next fan vote from one of our early day listeners and probably our most engaged fan, Kayla with a C.
Hi, Kayla.
And she wanted us to do a body horror movie. So we do have a poll out there for a few different body horror films for our next fan episode. So if you feel strongly about that, hop over to our Patreon and vote on it. If you don't like that and you want to see us do a different kind of themed vote, if you go over there and let us know what you want, we'll take that into consideration for the next month as well. And one other fun thing we started to do. Eleanor is our editor for this podcast, and since day one, she has been making like a little bloopers and outtakes and like favorite moments reel just for me to appreciate because we're chaos incarnate when we record. We've started to post some of our favorites of those over on the Patreon. So if that's something you're interested in, or you just want some ad-free episodes or just want to support us, hop on over there. $5 a month gives you access to everything. So shameless plug, but really thank you guys. This has been so fun. So that's my cope.
It has been so fun. And yeah, the patrons have been great. Everybody's been great. We definitely put a lot into it, but we're loving that you guys are here. So
yes, we are. So Eleanor, how have you been coping this week?
not very well because it is hot. It is so hot outside. So I am staying inside. That's how I am coping. I am being an indoor cat. And I swear it feels like the inside of a dryer outside right now. It's insane. I can't with this.
I know. Where I live, when you walk outside, it feels like you just walk into like a literal swamp. Like, the air is so thick you can touch it, and it's so hot. I hate it so much.
Well, let's escape our horrors for a little bit. Charlie, tell us what we are digging into today.
We are digging into the 2009 movie, The Fourth Kind. The IMDb movie summary is the unsolved mystery of a town in Alaska with an extraordinary number of disappearances during the past 40 years with accusations of a federal cover-up. This is written by Olatunde Osusami and Terry Robbins. It's directed by Olatunde Osusami, and it is starring Mila Jovovich, Elias Koteas, and Will Patton. And we can't dig around in a horror sandbox without our trusty rusty tools. So, Eleanor, what is your Bloody Shovel Award?
Prettiest owl. Oh my God, she's gorgeous. I love her so much. I get that this owl, terrified a generation, but I love her. She's so pretty. And when I was reading up on this episode, I noticed that on IMDb, there is a position in the cast and crew called Owl Wrangler. And I want to hang out with that person.
That's the kind of niche job I want, to be the owl wrangler for a movie. It's funny because I know you loved the owl from Final Destination, so I knew your Bloody Shovel was going to be about this owl. I had no doubt.
I am at times predictable. But tell me, what's yours? What's your Bloody Shovel Award?
Mine is, this movie was my most personal Blair Witch-esque experience because I started my horror journey after Blair Witch, but this movie came out just in time where my frontal cortex wasn't fully formed yet and smartphones weren't a thing. So I watched this whole movie not sure if it was real or not, and that scared the shit out of me. So
well, they were definitely trying very hard to make sure you questioned whether or not it was real. Or really not even that. They definitely tried really hard to make sure you thought it was real.
Yes, which I'm sure we will talk about as we go through this. But yeah, they got me, at least until I got home and had access to Google, and then I was able to calm down. But all right, let's dive into it. So the movie opens with a blurry shot of someone walking towards the viewers, and as they get closer, it becomes clear that this is Mila Jovovich, and she says her name and says she will be portraying Dr. Abigail Tyler in The Fourth Kind.
I simply must know, Charlie, your life has turned into a horror movie. Who would you pick to play yourself?
This is funny. Okay, so I have been told that I look like Emilia Clarke in the past, which to be clear, I do not think I look like her. So listeners, if we ever do show our faces, don't be disappointed. But though I love her, I think I would pick one of these two people because they have very expressive faces and good eye rolls. And I love a good eye roll. So I think I would either go with Emma Stone or Aubrey Plaza. Those would be mine.
So I only have one if I got to pick who played me, and it would be Aubrey Plaza. So you have to pick one of the other two.
Okay, I'll take Emma Stone. I would watch that horror movie, Emma Stone and Aubrey Plaza. Oh, let's make it happen.
Or what if Aubrey Plaza played us both? Aubrey Plaza and Aubrey Plaza in Vicious Wombs, coming to summer 2027.
Yes, please. I love it. Oh, I would do anything to work with Aubrey Plaza. She's so cool. Mila Jovovich then says this film is a dramatization of events that occurred October 1st through the 9th of 2000 in the northern Alaskan town of Nome. To better explain the events of the story, the director has included actual archived footage throughout the film that was acquired from Dr. Abigail Tyler, who documented over 65 hours of video and audio materials during the incidents. And then she says that they've changed their names and professions of the people involved to protect their privacy. She says all the scenes in the movie are supported by these videos or by Dr. Tyler's testimony to the director himself. And she ends the monologue by saying, "In the end, what you believe is yours to decide. Please be advised that some of what you are about to see is extremely disturbing."
This definitely would have thrown me off if I'd seen it first time in theater, because I've never seen like that PSA kind of a thing at the beginning. If it's not like an educational film, like doing that in front of a fictional movie is a wild choice. And I wanted to also say, I found a version of this script where the director himself was supposed to do half of this intro. So I know he kind of does it at the end, but in the script version I found, he was actually doing half of these lines. So that's also definitely a choice, because his intent was apparently to have him and the lead actress standing there going, "You guys, this is so real what you're about to see. No, for real, for real."
Yeah, it is an interesting choice. And I assume you'll talk about the controversy around that at the end.
Oh, yes. You know I will.
Oh, good. Perfect. Okay, so I'll save that. Hey, it got little teenager me, but it is. I'm trying to wonder if without this intro, if I would have fallen for it or not. And I think I would have definitely been more skeptical. So the intro is definitely, it's weird. I've never seen a movie do it since or before this, but yeah, it did get me. So it opens with the director interviewing a woman, and at the bottom of the screen, it says recorded September 3rd, 2002, Chapman University, California. The director is telling the woman to relax, and he says he's going to try to make it as painless as possible. He then asks her to say her name, and she says she's Dr. Abigail Emily Tyler. And this is supposed to be the quote-unquote real Abby Tyler. And I have to say, she looks rough. Like, she's super gaunt. Her face is kind of sunken in. Her hair is super frayed at the ends, and she has these huge eyes that when I first saw this movie, I thought she was supposed to she seemed alien-esque to me. Like, it really hit me. Her whole persona is unsettling.
That is a good point. I didn't think about that when I saw it. I was kind of noting that it seemed like they were going out of their way to make her look less polished than the actor, to kind of drive the point home that no, this is real. But I gotta say, at no point did I think she was really the psychiatrist. It's clear she's acting. If anything, I felt like she was a pretty good actor who got told that she needed to somehow both overact and underact to sell her role. It's weird.
That's fair. Yeah, like I said, if it wasn't for the PSA in the beginning, I probably wouldn't have bit into this movie as hard because she's not that convincing. But
No,
yeah,
and it is kind of funny for us to both be like, well, the actor wouldn't come on screen and lie to us. Like, that's their whole job.
right. Their whole job is to pretend to be something they aren't for the movie that they're in. Yeah. So the real Abby says after what happened to her husband Will, she went to her friend who is also a psychologist because she was having trouble dealing with what happened to her husband. It then cuts to a recording that says actual audio recorded October 1st, 2000, Campos Care, Anchorage. And there's a man there named Dr. Abel Campos. And then after his name, it says alias. And he's asking her if she needs more time. And Abby responds that this is something she has to do to heal herself and for her kids. And she says since that night, her daughter Ashley still can't see, and she doesn't think it's going to come back. She then says she wants to remember the face of the man so she can track him down and get some closure.
I think it's super interesting that she's talking about wanting to find the man who killed her husband, but she's couching it in terms like set the record straight and get closure. There's no conversation about justice. And I think this is a huge tell. And I think deep down she knows that what really happened to him, which we'll talk about when we get there, but she's a lot more concerned about being believed and getting some sort of closure than about getting justice.
That's true. She doesn't say and arrest him and do all of that. And it's funny because watching this now a couple times, I didn't realize how many times they kind of hint at what actually happened throughout this movie. And this is the first time they do that for sure, but it happens quite a few times.
Yeah, it was much more apparent after the first watching of this film, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So Abby and Dr. Abel decide to film her, and it changes to a side-by-side of the quote-unquote real Abby and then the fake Abby being filmed. Dr. Abel begins to do something that resembles hypnosis, and it continues to cut back and forth between the two Abbys. The real and fake Abbys both close their eyes, and Abel says, let's go back to August 2nd of this year. He asks what she and Will were doing, and she says they were in bed together, and he was sleeping and she was wide awake. And I'm just going to pause here really quick to say this movie does a ton of flipping back and forth between the quote real and quote fake footage. So much so that it's definitely going to be way too hard to call it out every time it happens. Sometimes they're playing side by side. Sometimes it's just one of the two versions. Sometimes it flips back and forth. And there's other times where there's literally 4 screens up at the same time of various things going on. And I'm not going to mention every time it flips between the real and the fake recordings. I'm going to try to keep it to when it like really matters to the plot.
Yeah, and I think this thing had the potential to be very cool and artsy and whatever, but I don't think it achieved that. I found it confusing, and it was pretty obvious that this wasn't real footage. So, like, try harder or don't do this is, I guess, what I would say here, because they managed to do both things kind of badly, in my opinion.
That's fair. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that for sure. Especially because they make it too artsy while simultaneously not making it. I don't know. It's not well done. So,
No, it's I don't know. There's points of this movie when there's like six different, like a split screen with like six different things happening all at the same time. And I think maybe if what the director was doing was trying to confuse you, it achieves the goal. And maybe it's like a weird thing to kind of distract you or to trick you into thinking it must be real because this is entirely too chaotic.
that's true. Yeah, because sometimes when it's in that multi-split screen, literally one of the screens is like a close-up of an orange on Abby's desk or something. And it's just like, why? Like, this makes no sense.
The owl wrangler put that there for the owl.
Aw, owl treats. Abel and Abby go back and forth in her hypnotic state, and he asks her what woke her up that night, and she starts to scream in terror. And we see her husband in bed, and he gets stabbed in the chest by something, but it's really blurry. And Abel tells her to try to see his face, and she says she can't see it. She really starts to freak out, so Abel wakes her up, and she's upset because she was right there, but she can't see the person's face that stabbed her husband. And Abel reassures her that it's not her fault and says maybe that she should consider taking some time off, but Abby responds that she needs to continue the study because it meant a lot to Will.
So we're supposed to think here she did not take sufficient time off after her husband was apparently brutally murdered. Like, yikes, Doc, you definitely should know better.
I mean, I think it's literally the next scene where they say, yeah, I went back to work 2 months after it happened because she needed to have some normalcy in her life. But yeah, she definitely should have taken some time.
Which I do understand wanting to get back to the normalcy, because if you're stuck at home or whatever and you're just constantly thinking about it, okay, I can understand that. But if she's acknowledging like this wasn't enough time, I don't know.
Yeah, she's clearly having some issues here, but she's not able to handle it correctly. Speaking of the next scene, Abby begins flying a small plane, and she's flying over these mountains into the city of Nome, Alaska, and she says it's because you can only get to Nome by plane.
Second biggest lie of the movie. That town is flat as hell. The movie was filmed in Bulgaria, which looks beautiful, but Nome is so flat that the finish line for the famous Iditarod is located there. So there are definitely roads there. It's true that in very harsh winters, a lot of the roads don't get used much because many of them go to quite remote areas, which might actually be part of the reason for the disappearances that we are going to talk about later. But yeah, Nome is not a mountainous town. It is a flat coastal tundra.
That's an interesting choice by the director.
A lot of interesting choices in this one. But
Yeah.
I looked at pictures of Nome, I looked at pictures of where this movie was filmed, and we see it in the movie. Given the choice, like, I'm definitely picking Bulgaria.
Yeah, that's true. Like, Bulgaria is probably way prettier. Though the Iditarod's pretty cool. Is this where the Balto statue is?
Ooh, is it where the statue is? Let me look that up. That is in Central Park, New York. No, that can't be
What the
right.
fuck? There has to be another one. Actually, I think you're right because I think I've seen it. Now you say it.
Oh, and the one that's in Alaska is in Anchorage.
Oh, okay, that makes sense too.
But Balto was set in Nome, Alaska, I think.
It at least ended there.
Right.
So, yeah. Which if Balto didn't make you cry, you're heartless. Love that movie. Great movie.
Balto was a real dog?
Yeah. Oh
I'm
my God,
learning
you didn't know Balto was a real story? You think there's statues to a fake dog?
This is America. Of course I think there's statues to a fake dog, Charlie.
Eleanor.
I'm learning this in real time.
This is so funny.
Oh my God. But yeah, he was supposedly born in Nome, Alaska. I didn't look any of this up because I was like, it's a kids movie. It's not really relevant.
No, it's a great movie. Come on.
Oh my God.
Oh, that is so funny.
As punishment for this embarrassing admission, I'm going to watch this with my kids later.
Yay. Oh, duh. It might make him cry. But yes, you should. Departing from Balto back into the Alien movie, it's been 2 months since Abby's husband's passed away, and she arrives at her office, and there's a client named Scott who is waiting there for her. She starts her therapy session with him and asks how he's been sleeping, and Scott says it's getting worse. He wakes up in the middle of the night almost every night around 2:30 or 3 in the morning, and he says there's always an owl in his window when this happens. And then it cuts to multiple patients describing the same encounter with an owl when they try try to sleep at night. And they say it looks at them and won't fly away no matter what they do. And then we get this really creepy / pretty shot of this white snowy owl's eye.
It is so pretty. I know we've talked about like night terrors and sleepwalking. Have you ever had sleep paralysis, or are you familiar with like the quote unquote sleep paralysis demon?
Oh, I'm very familiar with it. And the reason I'm actually terrified of it because my dad has it really bad, or at least he did for most of his life. And he's described it to me in detail where it's like for him, it's an old hag that sits on his chest and he can't breathe and he can't move. And his stories of his sleep paralysis have freaked me out so much that I have become a stomach sleeper so that no hags could sit on my chest.
He should watch Widow's Bay.
Oh, I need to watch Widow's Bay.
Yes,
I've
you
been
do.
seeing that.
It's very good.
Well, I don't know that he will enjoy it if it has sleep paralysis. I don't know that I want to bring that back for him, but I'll recommend it.
Don't tell him that's coming. Let's just see how it goes.
Okay, fair. Do you have sleep paralysis?
I have had it twice. And as it was happening, I knew exactly what was happening, and it was still super scary. If you don't know, sleep paralysis is basically when you're between kind of waking and sleeping. So the part of your brain that makes you not walk around in the middle of the night while you're asleep, for the most part, that is still active, but the part of your brain that is awake is awake. So you are awake, you are conscious, but you can't move. And a lot of people, when they're experiencing this, can feel very frightened and they can hallucinate. In the 2 times that it happened to me, I once was certain that there was a man with ill intent standing behind my head and like leaning over me. And logically, I knew he wasn't there because that would mean that he was made out of my headboard. But I still felt it, and it was very terrifying. The only other time I've experienced it, I looked up and I could see a raven the size of like a huge cat sitting on my chest and looking down at me and seeming vaguely annoyed. I knew that the raven wasn't there, but I was still experiencing kind of a really scared feeling. And I remember, especially the first time where I thought there was a man behind my head, I remember saying to myself, I am experiencing sleep paralysis. I know exactly what this is. There's no man behind my head. I'm fine. And then kind of ... But this is still really scary though.
That sounds terrifying. Even if you don't, that would freak me out. The man one specifically. I think I remember you telling me about the raven one and I was like, oh, did you chit chat with it? Maybe it was a messenger. What did it have to say?
I wish.
I thought the raven was cool.
Yeah, looking like now I do. In the moment I didn't, but now I like once I, came out of it, I was like, that was actually kind of cool. But you can't talk.
Right, because you're frozen.
I wish it would have talked to me.
Yeah,
Right?
Come on, Raven.
Get it together.
Well, in the same way that the raven didn't talk to you, the owl did not speak to Abby's patients. And they say the first time that they saw the owl was when they were kids. And they say they've seen it every night that week in particular, so the week that they're having their sessions with Abby. They also say they remember that somehow the owl got inside and they had a feeling of it looking down at them, but it's hard to remember and it feels like a dream. And she specifically asked one of the clients named Tommy to come back tomorrow because he's not the first patient that she's had that has experienced something like this.
I did like how they did the back and forth shot rather than like a montage. The camera will pan to the doc and she'll ask a question and then it'll pan back to the couch where the patient is sitting and the patient will answer and then it'll pan back to the doc. But every time it pans back to the couch, it's a different patient. So the questions are the same, but it's advancing the narrative, but also showing you that there's multiple different people who are affected by this. It's not super original. I think you see this in other movies too, but I really liked it. I thought it was well done here.
Yeah, it's cool because it's showing you that there's multiple people in the city that are experiencing the same thing, and it makes the owl creepier right off the bat. After her therapy sessions, Abby goes to pick up her kids from school, and in the background, she's talking about how her daughter Ashley developed a conversion disorder that causes her to be blind after Will died. And while she's picking her daughter up from school, she seems to be getting picked on by other kids, and she's super upset. And Abby asks her what's wrong, and Ashley says one of the kids at school called her a faker and said she's making all of this up just because she wants everyone to feel bad for her.
Conversion disorder is real. It used to be diagnosed as a psychiatric disorder, but it is now called a functional neurological disorder, and it can in fact cause vision problems to include loss of vision, and it can also cause PNES, or psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, like we talked about in our Thelma episode. And they think it's caused by abnormalities in the brain structure and trauma. So basically, if your brain is wired a certain way and you experience trauma, this can be one way that your brain deals with it.
That is super interesting. Brains are so weird. Like, I wish we could just figure it all out and understand why all of these things happen, because the fact that you can experience trauma and it makes you go blind as a result and you have no control over that, that's just crazy. The family then goes home and they have dinner, and Abby's saying a prayer asking for all of them to heal from what happened. And she tries to talk to her son Ronnie about what team his sports team is playing the next day. And there's this really awkward exchange where Ronnie says Dad never forgot, and Abby says, well, Dad's not here anymore. And Ronnie says, yeah, he's not. And then he asks if she can accept how he died yet. And Abby gets super upset. And then Ronnie says, you're always helping other people, but you can't even help yourself. And then he gets up and leaves.
He's like, physician, heal thyself. And I get that he is supposed to portray he's angry at his mom, but in this scene, I also believe that this kid personally hated Mila Jovovich.
I know. The hate from Ronnie throughout this whole movie is visceral. It's actually, I would argue, overdone. That, or he just always hated his mom and, like you said, hates Mila, but I don't know. After this exchange, we get this gorgeous shot of this owl sitting outside, and the camera circles it and its head follows the camera, twisting all the way around, and we see it sitting in front of the Tyler's house.
I loved this scene, the owl tracking the camera and then spinning all the way around. It's so cool. Like, I get why it works for a horror thing, but I can't get over how pretty it is. Like, it's prettier than the Final Destination owl. Sorry. It is.
I agree. I think if I remember correctly, when I first started watching this movie, I thought the owl was like a protector of these people or something. Like, to find out that it's the bad guy was kind of upsetting because it is a very pretty owl. So back in the house, the fake Abby sits down in her office, and we're listening to an audio recording of real Abby saying Ronnie blamed her for Will's death and said she couldn't help him or anyone, and Ronnie was right about that. The fake Abby then picks up a book that has a piece of paper inside of it with the name Dr. Udusami and a phone number under it. And it's a book that appears to be about the ancient Sumerian language, and it's written by him.
I'm going to talk about this later. It's sort of about the Sumerian language, but it's also about a bunch of nonsense. We'll get there.
I'm interested to see. I mean, I have an idea. So Abby picks up the audio recorder and she plays it. And on the screen, it says actual audio recorded August 1st, 2000, Will Tyler dictation. And we hear Will say that there's a trend throughout Nome of debilitating sleep disorders and the cause remains unknown. He says about 300 people have experienced that. Around 3 a.m., they wake up scared, and he's not sure if it's related to the missing people or the disappearances in the town or not. And while Abby is listening to this, Ashley, her daughter, comes around the corner, and this is kind of heartbreaking. She goes, "Daddy?" And Abby says, no, my baby. It's a recording of his voice. And Ashley comes and sits in bed with her and they cuddle.
Yeah, it was super sad.
Yeah, it was really sad. Especially for like your blind daughter to hear her dad's voice. Ugh, so sad. It cuts to the next day and we're back in Abby's office with Tommy. And she's performing the same hypnosis on him that we saw Dr. Abel use on her in the beginning of the movie. While he's hypnotized, she asks if he saw the owl last night and he says yes. And she asks him what it looks like, and it cuts to a recording of the real Tommy, and he says he doesn't remember what the owl looks like and is not there anymore. And at this point, it's cutting back and forth between the real Tommy and the fake Tommy. And he looks up and says, "There's something outside my door. It's going to open." And he starts to freak out and he's crying, saying, "Oh my God, no," just screaming. And then he kind of screams in terror. And Abby tries to wake him up, but it doesn't work. So he launches himself over the back of the couch and he kicks over the lamp next to the couch. And Abby tells him it's not real. It's just a memory. And Tommy finally snaps out of it.
This actor, the guy who plays the fake Tommy, he does a really good job freaking out. Like, he was very believable. The, screaming no, the freaking out, the knocking over the couch. I was disturbed by it. Like, I think he absolutely nailed it.
Yeah, he did. Not all of the real footage for this movie is good, but there are some that I'm like, okay, yeah, that's well done. And Like, that's believable. Abby asks Tommy what he saw, and he says nothing. And he tells her he needs to go home and keeps repeating that he's okay to himself. Abby continues to ask him if he saw the owl, and Tommy just asks if they can talk about it next time, and she says okay and lets him go. After this, it cuts to the audio of a 911 call a few hours after Tommy's session with Abby. And the caller on the phone is a woman crying for help, saying, "Put the gun down, please." And she's saying that she loves him and just kind of pleading with someone. And then we hear some shots being fired and a lot of screaming. And the woman says, "You don't have to do this, Tommy."
Again, the insistence that this is real footage is a really bizarre choice. And then backing it up with supposed 911 calls, like there's no planet on which this is real. And I simply don't understand why you constantly insist that it is, instead of just like splice in a couple of scenes of what you're calling the real footage and let it stand as is. Instead, they have to like constantly be like, oh, and here's also this audio recording and something from another angle. It's just, I don't know. I don't understand it.
Yeah, it is. It is overdone when they could just use the found footage the majority of the time with a few reenactments when necessary instead of the switching back and forth. It definitely would have been done better that way. In this moment, we're introduced to the character Sheriff August, who is driving to Tommy's house in his police car radioing for backup. We then see, quote, actual footage of Tommy's house that night with Tommy, his wife, and his 2 kids inside, though we don't actually see the kids, thank goodness. Tommy has a gun and he's shooting it into the air and through the window, and he's demanding to talk to Abby. So the police call Abby and tell her to get down to Tommy's house because he's asking for her. She gets there and they immediately hand her the phone and throw her into a bulletproof vest and give her the most basic and quick brief of all time to the situation. Like, they definitely should have back briefed her a little bit more before throwing her in front of this person's house. And when she picks up the phone, Tommy says he's sorry, but he has to do this. And it cuts to a side-by-side of the real Abby saying this whole situation was incredibly surreal, and then fake Abby trying to tell Tommy that he has a choice and to put the gun down. She's reminding him of how much he loves his family, but he says she'd understand if he saw what she saw. And she asks what he saw, and he says it doesn't matter now. And there's a bunch of snipers in the area too trying to get a shot of Tommy, but they can't. And Tommy starts to scream. And do you know what this means at all by chance?
Zimabu Eter. Yeah, so this is really interesting. It's actually where the famous alien from the early 2000s, Invader Zim, got his name.
I could tell that you're being sarcastic, but
would that be cool though? That would be so cool.
It would be cool. I'm taking that as lore. Like that's canon. This is how this movie is how Invader Zim got his name.
Yeah. No, but I did look into this. I don't think it's really Sumerian, and there are dozens of different definitions if you look it up online, but they're all from like blogs. There's no like, history professor of ancient Sumerian weighs in on this weird movie. There's none of that. It's like people insisting they know what it is, or saying they're pretty sure in the movie they said the definition, which I don't think they ever do. I did find something interesting. The version of the script that I found online, it isn't even the same phrase. It's Zimabu Fran Ev Irai, which is it's 2 words. The first one is Zimabu. The second one is Franeveyry. And that also got me nowhere, is trying to, figure out what it meant. I think the director picked a nonsense phrase to purposefully leave it unknown so that it's more mysterious.
That's kind of upsetting that all roads lead to a dead end with that one. But that makes sense for this movie.
Maybe it's the first and last name of the alien entity trying to contact us.
Yes, Invader Zim himself. We then get the darkest scene of this movie where Tommy shoots everyone in the house, including himself, and the cops rush in while Abby stands there and screams.
Okay. If at this point I had believed, even for 1 second, that this was actual footage and that this was real, like, fuck you, my guy. You can't show a man murder his entire family on screen, even if it's blurred. If this was supposed to be real, this is an extremely evil decision.
Yeah, that's definitely something. I mean, I've watched quite a few true crime documentaries, and if the footage exists of someone being murdered, you don't play it. Like, that's really gross.
Yeah. And to be clear, they're showing the actor, he's brandishing the gun, he's saying he's going to kill his wife, and then it shows a split screen of the actor shooting his. You don't see any children. We're made to understand there's children. He shoots off screen. So we're made to understand that he was killing his kids and then his wife and himself. And in the middle of watching the actor do this, it cuts to grainy black and white footage of from a dash cam or something, and it's supposed to be you're watching this happen for real. And I think that is evil and awful, and I don't know why you would do it.
Yes. The other reason we know that the scene isn't real is because in this tiny town of Nome, they're pretending that there's a whole squad of snipers available at a moment's notice, which I'm going to guess there's no snipers in Nome. But that's just, my thoughts on the issue.
Oh, I know. It's an insane response to
It
what
is.
is supposed to be a relatively small population in a small town. Especially this was pre 9/11. Like this movie is set pre 9/11. So you're gonna tell me you guys have like, I don't know, a New York City SWAT team on standby, apparently?
Right? Yeah, I don't think so. After this, Abby's taken to the police station and questioned about what happened. August asks if Tommy told Abby what he saw, and Abby says no. She says he thought he saw an owl, but it turned out to be something else. And August asks, well, how do they know what Tommy saw is real if he saw it all under hypnosis? And Abby says, well, she's not sure that it is real. From that, August draws a conclusion that Tommy might not have done this if Abby hadn't put him under hypnosis in the first place and made him see something imaginary. Abby says, well, at the very least, Tommy definitely believed that what he saw was real because he was so scared. August then asks if he did this because she hypnotized him, and she gets super offended and says it's a ridiculous and offensive question to ask. From this point, they get into an argument about if all of this is Abby's fault or not, and she says no matter what, it would have manifested eventually because clearly Tommy was suppressing something. August asks why Abby didn't call the police after his violent episode in her office, and Abby argues that he was fully conscious and fine when he left the office, so she had no reason to suspect that he was going to do any of this, and she did call his wife to look after him just in case. And this makes August really mad, and he says, well, now she's dead. Abby gets upset and says she's not going to deal with the accusations and tries to leave, and as she's leaving, she says that there's something weird going on in the town regarding everyone's sleep. And there's this weird exchange about how August doesn't deal in hallucinations, he deals in real flesh and blood. And Abby says, yeah, I know, like my husband, but you haven't solved his murder yet. And August says, Abby, you know damn well what happened to Will, and that case is closed. And Abby basically says, no, you suck at your job, August. And August screams at her to sit down, and then she does, and he starts to yell at her to stop this hypnosis crap because it's bringing nothing but bad news to the town.
Yeah, and I think this is the part where she brings up the FBI being involved with a high number of missing persons case in Nome, Alaska at the time. This is actually real, and it's a big old bummer, and I'll tell you more about it at the end.
Oof, not good. All right. So Abby goes home and she says she felt responsible for Tommy's death, and she starts recording herself saying people have mentioned seeing an owl, but based on what Tommy said, they're having some sort of false recollection. She wonders if the other patients feel the same, and she says she must proceed with extreme caution, and right after she says that, she falls asleep. The next morning, Abby drives to work, and Abel is there saying he wanted to make sure Abby was okay. Abby hands her assistant her recorder and asks her if she can transcribe it, and then Abby and Abel walk together and start to chat, and he asks her to consider taking a sabbatical to take a step back and get some clarity on what's actually happening here. Abby says she has to keep working because it's the only thing that she has left within her power, and she doesn't believe that everything that is happening in the city of Nome is just a coincidence. So Abel asks her after that if he can stay around to keep an eye on her, and they hug. Abby then does a therapy session with Scott, and Scott immediately asks what happened to Tommy, and Abby says it had something to do with his sleeping habits, and Scott's wife is there too, and she's really worried, and she says she's worried because this is the second suicide in a couple months in Nome.
Yeah, Scott's wife, Cindy, did you catch that when you first watched this? The second suicide in a few months? Because I didn't. Not the first time.
No. Yeah, I didn't on the first time either, but it was either the second or third time I went back and watched this, I was like, oh, the second suicide, because, well, we find out who the first is. But yeah, like I said, there's some little nuggets where they hide what really happened, but I did not catch them the first watch. Scott then asks Abby to hypnotize him too, because he says he wants to know what's in his head. And Abby says that they're going to have to go about this really delicately, and she asks Abel to join them and observe, and they say yes, he can join. Abby hypnotizes Scott and asks him when was the last time he had trouble sleeping. He says it was last night and he remembers seeing an owl. Scott describes the owl as beige with big eyes, and then he says it doesn't look like a normal owl, and then he starts to get really scared and worked up the same way that Tommy did. And then he says it's not an owl. It seems like he's trying to wake his wife up, so he's reliving the night before and he's trying to wake his wife up, but she won't wake up. Then he says the owl's outside the door. He says he knows what they are and they've visited him since he was little. They open the door and he starts making this really weird gurgling noise, and Abby tries to wake him up, but he doesn't wake up and he just starts screaming louder and louder and starts to convulse. And then he snaps out of it and sits up really alarmed, and then he pukes.
He did such a good job when he sits up, because they zoom in on his face and you almost watch him turn a little bit green, and he does this like little gesture with his mouth and throat, and it was extremely convincing. Like, before he puked, I knew he was going to puke, and as the podcast like official puke evaluator, I feel compelled to note that.
You do always evaluate the puke scenes. And this one, I mean, it was real. And even when he puked, which is gross, they show it a little bit. I could have done without that, but it seems and feels very, very real. Very well done. So Scott then says it doesn't make any sense. And he says what he saw isn't from here, but he can't describe it or see it in his own mind. All he can see is an owl, but he knows it's not an owl. The only other thing he remembers is the smell of putrid cinnamon. And does the cinnamon smell mean anything here? Did you come across that in all of your alien research?
As best I can tell, it seems to have been made up for this movie. You can find people like on Reddit who claim that they have been visited by aliens. These folks will say that they smelled either sulfur or burnt cinnamon, but they might just be remembering this movie. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't find anything from before this movie was released that talked about burnt cinnamon. I did find one thing that's kind of interesting. There's a type of weed control that uses clove oil, and some people say that it smells a lot like cinnamon, and they'll smell it like out in a public park or something. So I don't know. Don't freak out if you're in a nice park and smell cinnamon. You're probably not being abducted by aliens. Probably.
That kind of sounds nice, though. Like a nice, lovely park that smells like cinnamon. I would chill there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's why the aliens are drawn to it. They're just like, oh, this is delightful.
Delightful. Their favorite season is fall as well. I get it, aliens.
All aliens are Scorpios. This is a fact.
Scott then says that the worst part of what he experienced is a voice inside of his head. He says that whatever this entity is talks, but they talk inside your mind, like they're connected or something. And then he says that this entity took him away somewhere, but he can't remember where. Abby stops him and tells him that that's enough for today. And she says under the circumstances, she's going to call August and let him know that they've conducted this session.
Oh, God. I'm going to report this session to the cops, and I'm only telling you after the fact. Like, big yikes.
Yeah, that's true. That is a big yikes. But I mean, I understand because she's kind of on her toes now, but she probably should have warned him that there was a chance she was going to have to report it if it went this way. But yeah, definitely should have done that before. Scott says that after experiencing this, he now understands why Tommy did what he did. He says it's because it feels and looks like the worst thing you could ever imagine. And then Scott and his wife leave.
I think you could argue that it's a little lazy to have Scott just be like, it's the worst thing you can imagine. I can't describe it, and I'm not going to. But I don't know. In this context, I can see how that makes it a little bit like extra scary. Like if you are the therapist and this is really happening and these people are freaking out, but they can't describe it, that's scary. So I don't hate this. I don't know that I love it, but I get it in this context.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it. Obviously, I want more. I want them to say more. They're obviously experiencing something awful and they're portraying that. So just tell us what it is. But yeah, I don't know. I could also see, though, like if you're the patient in this situation, you probably are processing what you just felt and you don't want to come across as more crazy than you already do. So you're probably holding a little bit back for that because you don't want to be like, it's aliens, and then get put in a psych ward for the next month.
And this was a traumatic experience, right? And what did Joachim Trier say, the director from Thelma? What is trauma but a memory that you don't know how to express?
Yes, so true, so true. After Scott and his wife leave, Abby asks Abel if he believes in abduction theories, and he asks if she means like kidnappings, and she says no, more like alien abductions. And then she goes on to say that there's been over 11 million people who have reported seeing UFO sightings since the 1930s. And Abel says, this can't be real. And she responds by saying that the facts boast 11 million witnesses. And because of that, it would hold up in any court case in the world. But he says, well, there's reasons for all of those, and they have to deal with hard evidence and facts, not, made up UFO sightings.
A couple of notes on this. I will talk a little bit about statistics later on, so if that's your thing, stay tuned, as the kids say. But 2, she says there are over 11 million people who have either seen or know someone who has reported seeing a UFO since 1930. And then she says 11 million witnesses would win any court case in the world. But it's so clear to me that her trauma has totally obliterated her critical thinking, because in her own statistic, she doesn't have 11 million witnesses. She has an unknown number of witnesses, plus everyone that they have ever known.
Yeah, her logic here is definitely flawed. Not to mention, okay, maybe there's 11 million people who have witnessed something that they say is a UFO, but all of those accounts vary so drastically that, like, what court case are you holding this up against? Like, what's the argument?
I thought it was a Boeing 747, but it turned out to be a Boeing 767. Therefore, it's a UFO. I don't know.
Yeah, well, technically, anything that you see flying that you don't know what it is a UFO. So
Yeah. Or I
yeah.
suppose we should note here, you're supposed to call them now unidentified aerial phenomenon, I think. So they're
Yeah.
UAPs.
Oh, UAPs.
Yeah.
Yes.
But UFO, UAP, whatever, you guys know what we're talking about.
Yeah, Sorry, we're using the old terms, but this movie is from 2009, so that's what we're going with. Well, Abby and Abel are having this discussion. The assistant comes in all flustered, and she asks Abby if she's listened to the tape that she gave her. They go out and play it, and we hear what Abby said the night before, but right when she falls asleep, we hear a door open, and then Abby starts to scream a lot. And then we hear a weird alien language kind of thing that says, and on the screen it says untranslated, and then the recording ends. And then Abby says, that's not my voice, which obviously it's not. It cuts to the director interviewing the real Abby, and he asks her how she felt hearing that. And she says that she was in shock and denial. She says she went home and tried to recount what happened, and then it cuts back to fake Abby in her home, reliving what happened the night before. She discovers she has a strange mark on the back of her shoulder, and she wonders if it's an allergic reaction or something else. And she also says that whatever it was, she fought it, but it was too strong and it took her away. She said the moment it became too real was when she looked on the floorboards and she saw scratch marks headed towards the door. She says she was determined to figure out what it was and where it took her and what it did to her.
And apparently none of her kids heard her screaming for help or the demon voice coming out of her face in a terrifying language. But it's also interesting that she, in that moment, didn't seem concerned with their safety either. Like, did they hear that? Are they okay? And I'm not talking about in the moment that happened in her room. I'm talking as she's hearing this thing on the recording. Why is her first thought not, did something happen to my kids? Did they hear this? Are they okay? Like, it's 100% about her.
That's true. Like, if I thought someone invaded my house to the point where they forcefully dragged me out of my room and I didn't remember or realize it, I would definitely go ask my kids, like, hey, has anything weird been going on lately? Like, I would definitely at least check in on them.
Did mommy have a nightmare? Did mommy say something weird?
Right. Anything like that. Or like, has anything creepy been happening? Anything like that. But yeah, no, she doesn't do that at all. Abby tries to figure out what the language was that she was speaking, but it wasn't anything she was familiar with. And she goes back and she picks up that ancient Sumerian book again, and she calls a number inside of it. Dr. Otosami answers, and Abby asks if he's familiar with a person named Will Tyler. He says he's not, and then he asks who he's speaking with, but Abby hangs up the phone. She starts to flip through the book, and we see various ancient carvings in it. And we also see small snippets talking about conversing with the god Anu and raising heaven and earth bonds. It also mentions fire filling the sky. As she's doing this, the phone rings again, and Abby picks it up. It's Dr. Otosami, and he says a man named John called him from this number. Abby says that there's no John here, and he says, I know. She asks why John called him, and Dr. Otosami says he called because he wanted to have a history lesson on ancient languages. Abby tells him that it was her husband who used to call him and that he was murdered. It then cuts to real Abby saying that Dr. Otosami listened to her and didn't judge her or analyze her, and then right after that, he flew out to Nome. It cuts to a scene of Dr. Otosami in the office, and he's there saying that he's sure the language he's hearing is ancient Sumerian. He says it is the holy grail of dead languages, but they haven't deciphered the entire lexicon. He starts to translate what the recording says, and he says that the last two words are our creation, but he's not sure what the first two words are. And then he says that he can make out two other words that are either ruin or destroy.
And I think this is the part of the movie where they randomly put like a credit in front of the actor, like as the actor is talking about the translation of the language, there's a credit in front of him and it says, Hakim Kai Kazim as Dr. Otosami. Like, it was so odd. And this reminded me, I once worked with a guy who would say, "I swear to God this is true," before saying the most obviously untrue things I have ever heard, to the point where the others that I worked with would talk about this. He was reciting scenes from movies that we had all seen as if they were his personal stories. And that is our reaction to him, is how I felt about this movie's insistence throughout that it was all very true. Like, it is just as believable as that guy was.
Oh my gosh, I know somebody like that too, and they'll tell us the most insane stories about like rooming with like famous people in college, or like playing football with them, or just like these most outrageous things. And I was like, okay, maybe one of these stories is true, but there is no way all 50 of them are. Like, I don't know. It's just funny. I don't understand it, but I met people like that too. And you're right that this movie does kind of give that same vibe. Dr. Abel is there while this discussion is happening, and he says none of this makes any sense. They both ignore him, and Dr. Otosami says that this is the oldest language in human history, and for some reason, it was being recorded in this room. Abby asks what was being done to her, and Dr. Otosami doesn't answer again, but he says what it is unsettling and that the vocals don't sound human. Dr. Abel tells him to stop and says to stop fueling these fires and that there has to be a logical reason for this distortion. Dr. Otosami says he's not jumping to any conclusions, but Abby's voice sounds fine in the recording. And Abel says yes, but the old tape could have been recorded over. And Dr. Otosami says that still doesn't explain the language being spoken. He says he's studied the language for most of his career, and what he's found is intriguing. It then shows a bunch of ancient stone carvings, and he says you can go to any Sumerian exhibit and see what he's about to tell us. You can see drawings of rockets that look like Apollo launching into the sky, men wearing what look like oxygen masks, and this was all created in the 4th millennium BCE. He says this was 4,000 years before Christ walked the earth, and he says Noah's Ark and Genesis were stories that existed in Sumerian culture 6,000 years before the Bible was written. He again says Genesis came from the Sumerian epic of creation, and that Noah's Ark came from the Sumerian deluge. The alien god basis has its origin in Sumerian history, and that's what he says directly.
From what I can tell, none of these carvings that he's talking about are actual, like they're not recreations of real Sumerian artifacts. They seem to be invented. I could be wrong, but I couldn't find anything reliable to say otherwise. They definitely seem like the same type of art. I think they were probably created for this film, but you can find plenty of images of some type of ancient carving and then people saying that they can see what looks like rockets in it. And I mean, I guess, but they also look like pillars or canoes or poles with flags on them. Like it's silly.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at art that's that old and it's very basic, it could be interpreted in so many different ways. You can't know for sure unless you've studied it for, the majority of your career. And even then it's up for interpretation. And to be clear, I'm not saying this person studied. The person in this movie is not the person who studied Sumerian language.
No, and the experts who have studied this stuff will be like, no, that's a ceremonial whatever, or that's clearly a flag or whatever. They have some good ideas about what it is. It's not as if there's no clue as to what this might be, so aliens fit very neatly. It's more like this is a fun thing to think about, and some people kind of just go way too far with it.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more at the end, because it is kind of fun to think about. But yeah, we'll get into that later. The movie cuts back to the room, and Dr. Abel says that it's one thing to entertain wild theories and another thing to invest in them. Dr. Otosami says he's not drawing any conclusions, he's simply dealing dealing with facts gathered from years of data research and collection.
Except he is drawing conclusions. He wrote a whole book with a conclusion, and he's basically putting that forward. And he's like, I'm not jumping to conclusions, but it's totally alien. So have you seen that History Channel alien guy meme? It's like, I'm not saying it's aliens, but it's aliens. He's doing that.
Yes.
He's literally doing that.
He is. I forgot about that meme with the crazy hair. Ugh, classic meme. Classic meme. Abel looks at Abby in this moment and says, do you truly believe you were removed from your bedroom by members of the alien race? She doesn't answer and the phone rings. She picks it up and it's Scott's wife asking her to come over because something is wrong and Scott's asking for her. All three of them head to Scott's house and Scott is in bed freaking out. He looks really sick and he's having some sort of panic attack. Abby tries to calm him down and he says he doesn't want to talk about it, but he has to. Abby takes a blanket off of him and there's this like triangular wound or bruise thing on his arm. She asks him how he got it and he says he doesn't know. So they set up the camera. Scott says he doesn't want to go under hypnosis, but he can't remember without it. And Abby says that they can just put him under a very light hypnosis. He says he has to do it because he has to get it out of his head because it feels like it's just dug in there and he can't think straight anymore. Abby tells him to relax and she does the hypnosis. It's very quiet, and then all of a sudden, Scott sits up incredibly upright, and he starts to scream. It's a mix of a normal human scream and then that, like, cackly alien noise, and Scott starts to shake, and then he starts to float off the bed, and it cuts between fake Scott and a video of the real Scott, and the video of the real Scott gets very disordered and we can't see much of it, except Scott occasionally in a weird spot in the camera. A voice seems to come out of him that says, Tyler, respond, no need, pray, I, hear, and study. Suddenly, Scott falls back down in the bed, unmoving but still breathing. And I do have to say, I've mentioned this before. The first time I saw this movie, I was young, I was a teen, and I don't know if I saw it in theaters. I think I might have. And I didn't know 100% that it wasn't real. And I wasn't convinced that it was. I wasn't sure either way. But this was before smartphones, so I couldn't check in real times in the theaters. So like I said, this is my bloody shovel. This is my Blair Witch moment. I sat through this movie and this scene freaked me the fuck out. And it caused me to immediately go home and Google if this was real or not. And thank goodness I found out that it wasn't real. But those few minutes where I was like, this might be real, that really messed me up.
I gotta say, I think if I had seen it when I was younger, and even like if I had even a little bit of a doubt about whether or not it was real, I would have been terrified. But even now, I thought this was one of the scariest scenes in the movie.
This was definitely scary. This one and the one with Abby at the end really got me. And it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, if this is fake, not that scary. If this is real, I don't want this in my brain. So I kept doing the like, look away, look at it, look away, look at it thing in the theaters while I watched it. So after this, Abby tries to do the most rational thing a person could do after experiencing whatever that was. And she runs back home and starts to pack up all of her belongings and tells her kids that they're moving to North Carolina. The phone rings and Ronnie picks it up. He tells Abby that it's Abel and he's on his way over. Ashley keeps asking some innocent questions about why they're leaving and Abby just continues to pack. Ronnie gets really angry with Abby and she says she needs him to help and to take her sister to her room. He looks outside in this moment and says, Mom, what did you do? There's knocking on the door and the cops are there. It's Sheriff August and he's pissed. He says Scott is paralyzed from the waist down because 3 of the vertebrae in his neck are completely severed. He screams at her to tell him what happened. Abby says that there was something inside of him that twisted his body, but she doesn't have proof because the video was distorted. He says she's hurting people and he feels bad for what she's been through, but he has no choice and starts to read her Miranda rights. At this moment, Abel walks in while Abby is pleading to not be arrested. Abel tells August to stop, and he says he was there too. August asks Abel what he saw, and Abel says that August would have had to seen it to believe it. August is infuriated at this point, and Abel says Abby is clearly not capable of committing any physical harm to any man.
What was that? Like, where did that come from? Like, she
Right?
couldn't hurt anybody. Look at her. Like, first of all, this is extra funny because, like, if you saw this movie when it came out, you also saw Milla Jovovich in all the action movies that she's been in. So, like, yeah, we all know she could kick your ass. Like, what is this?
That's so true. It's just like, he's basically just saying she's a woman. She couldn't Like, it's so dumb. This movie is very 2009, I will say. But yeah, so after this, Abel tells August to calm down and that he can't arrest Abby because he's scared and he can't take her away from her children for something she did not do. August says, okay, but Abby will be under 24-hour surveillance and she will not leave these premises or she will be arrested. And like, this surely can't be legal, can it?
Yeah, like, what is he doing here? He starts to read her rights and he's like, you're under arrest. And then someone's like, well, you probably shouldn't arrest her. And he's like, okay, fine, you're medium under arrest, but you're on thin ice, missy.
Yes, and on house arrest, but not like officially, but I'll arrest you if you leave. Like, what no, that's not okay. Anyway, August leaves and he tells Abel to come with him. All the cops leave except one car that stays out front and sets up a dash cam. Abby says everyone was questioned by the police and they reminded August about the dozens of homicides and disappearances that had been happening since the 1960s when the FBI started to drop in from time to time. And she says nothing has been solved.
Nope, I'll talk about it.
The director then asks what she thinks that means, and she says that they have different levels for this kind of thing. An encounter of the first kind is when you see a UFO. The second kind is when you see evidence of a UFO, like crop circles or radiation. The third kind is when you make contact with an alien. But the fourth kind is abduction. And she thinks that Will, the missing people, and everything that happened in Nome is all connected, and not just there, but all over the world.
This close encounter scale, it comes from a book by a real astronomer and UFO researcher named J. Allen Hynek. He wrote a book called The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, back in 1972. And that scale inspired the title for the 1977 movie The Third Kind. And Hynek actually consulted on that movie. So this is just the next movie to be inspired by science fiction and a little bit of science.
I will say my significant other, he likes aliens. He likes them a lot. And he wanted me to mention here that I think since that book was published, the scale's been expanded to a couple other kinds, but there are other kinds of encounters now as well.
Yeah, there's Wikipedia pages you can read up on it, or you can go read about that astronomer if you want to know more. It has been expanded since then. I didn't include it in our notes here because this movie stops at the fourth kind, so I didn't really go into the rest. But if listeners are interested, they should definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's just a little fun fact. The movie then cuts to a clock that says 3:33 a.m. and the cop in the car outside of the house wakes up and he sees something light up the sky. So he gets out of his car to look at it, and it cuts to the real footage from the dash cam, and we briefly see a large circular object go over the house before the video cuts out. We hear the cop speaking, and he says there's something flying over the Tyler residence and it's pulling them out of the house and taking them and to send backup. The cops show up and August asks him what he saw. He says the video didn't record for some reason, and August is pissed and tells the cop to pull himself together. August goes into the house and finds Abby upstairs crying. August asks Ronnie what he saw, and Ronnie says nothing. He came into the room and she was gone. Abby says that there was a beam of light that took Ashley up into the sky, and August tells everyone to get out and then tells Abby to sit down. August says that the aliens aren't real and tells her to tell him what she saw. She starts screaming that he needs to tell her what the cop outside the house saw and that he's responsible because this happened while he had an officer outside.
Yeah, and at this part, he picks up a piece of furniture and smashes it into a mirror while he's screaming at her like an abusive partner. Like it's so gross.
It is so gross. The way that these two scream at each other, if they were ever in a relationship, it would be one of the most toxic relationships to ever exist.
Yeah, it almost seemed like they were trying to imply that's what it was. Like they have some sort of something underlying going on, but I don't know. I didn't like it.
No, I didn't get that from it, though. Now that you say it, I see that, I suppose. I just saw that they're both incredibly volatile people that rush to conclusions is what I got from these two characters.
Oh, I know. And I love that he's like, you need to calm down and be rational. Meanwhile, I'm going to smash furniture and scream at you.
Yeah, no, none of their interactions are well done. So they both continue to scream at each other for a while until Ronnie, the only adult in the room, tells them to stop. August says Abby hasn't been right in the head since Will died. And Abby says, well, August still hasn't found his killer. And August says, yes, Abby, yes, we have. But they continue to do this back and forth yelling at each other thing. And August decides to remove Ronnie from Abby's custody and tells her that she needs to get a lawyer. They take Ronnie away, and she does some of the worst acting I've ever seen in this moment. Like, this is the opposite of the hereditary grieving scene. Like, she is not freaking out nearly enough for having just watched one of her children been sucked out of the ceiling and another one taken away from her by the cops. Like, it's just, it needs to be better done, for sure.
No, it's not. It's not very believable. It's tragic. If you put yourself in the moment, it's certainly tragic and sad, but just I agree. She's underselling it.
Yeah, underselling it for sure. Real Abby says that she realized that no one was going to find Ashley and she had to do it on her own by finding a way to go to them directly.
Bitch, call a lawyer. You're on some sort of a house arrest for the disappearance of your daughter that, by the way, the cops apparently only spent like 5 minutes looking for before they snatched your son out of your house. Call a lawyer, not an alien.
Right? Like, get the lawyer and at least get one of the two kiddos back. Like, and then get the cops to actually look into your daughter's disappearance. It cuts to her sitting with Dr. Abel, who says he knows what he saw, but he can't accept it. Abby says she still has to do this. Odusami is there and asks if it's the right way. And Abby says she doesn't know, but she doesn't really have a choice. Abel then puts Abby under hypnosis and tells her to go back to the night she was recording herself in her room. She says she sees an owl looking down at her, but it's smiling at her, and she doesn't like when it smiles. She then says it's not an owl, and we get this grainy flashback, and it's 3:33 a.m., and she's in bed. Her door opens, and something comes inside, and she starts to scream. And I will say, what I do like about this movie is that they never show you what they think the alien is, and I think that makes it 100 times scarier, because then you just kind of make it as scary as you possibly can in your own brain.
Yeah, I think that can be done very well in some movies. I think it works here. I really liked the use of an owl as a harbinger of doom. Like, that as something that has existed in our lore and our mythology for a long time. So it's cool to see it evolve into like a more modern approach. And we saw this with Final Destination as well. And I like it. I think it's cool.
It is cool. And then what they do with the owl's eye, with the like kind of zoom in and zoom out of the little white dot with the black oval surrounding it, it makes it almost seem alien sometimes. So it's like we're about to see him, the owl's turning into an alien, and then it doesn't. And so it's kind of almost like what the people in hypnosis are seeing. Like, it's an owl, but it's not an owl, but it's an owl. So it's cool.
Yeah, owls and octopuses. Those are the two animals that, like, if aliens are real, it's them. It's those two.
There is a whole like octopuses are aliens theory out there if anyone's interested. That does exist as a theory. So there's some kind of altercation and Abby's screaming, "Help me," and then she's ripped out of her room and she says there's too many of them and it burns and it hurts. And we see fake Abby getting something jammed into her shoulder while she screams in pain. And then real Abby starts to convulse and then the real video gets super distorted and she kind of bends over backwards over the couch. And then we hear this alien voice that starts to come out of her. And this scene was the one that really made the hairs on my body stand up. And this is the one where I was like, okay, if this is real, I don't want to see this. If it's not real, I need to watch it. But regardless, I went back and forth and it really did. It unnerved me for a while.
It is really creepy. Like, the voice is creepy and it looks like her jaw unhinges or something. And I know it's pretty similar to a lot of possession movies that you see, like demonic possession, but it's definitely creepy. And then as we are watching this, we hear that alien voice and they display like what is supposed to be a translation on the screen.
Yes. And the alien voice says these few words and they're very like disordered. It says, "I enforce my will, not world no." And Abby screams at them for them to give her baby back. And the aliens say, "Child never returned. I am truth remains. I, Savior, Father." And then it gets really clear and it says, "I am God." Then it goes quiet and we see Abby fall onto the couch and she looks super messed up. Like you said, her jaw looks completely unhinged. Her mouth is huge. And the video cuts away again to more screaming and crying until suddenly everything is calm and the camera is sideways on the floor. It then cuts to the director and he asks what happened in the room. Abby says that they came and they abducted all of them but brought them back that same night. They don't remember what happened, and even the hypnosis that they do is all black. He then says the voice said it was God and asked her what she believes. She says she believes the things she's seen and felt inside of her was hopelessness, so it cannot be God, but it can pretend to be.
We saw earlier in the movie that this character is supposed to be very religious, specifically Christian. So it's interesting that she takes this angle and doesn't go with the, it's all demons or devils or whatever. I do think that makes her an interesting plot for sure, but I just thought it's unusual.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because you're right. This movie, because it is an alien horror movie, which I think it does an interesting blend of that, it definitely lingers on the demon devil bit. And like you said, we saw her praying earlier. So it is interesting that she goes aliens, not demons. The director then asks about Ashley, and she says it took her a couple of days to recover and wake up after that night. It cuts to her in the hospital with Abel and August. August seems calm and says he hates he has to do this under the conditions that she's in, but he has to ask her about how Will died. Abby says he was murdered. August then holds up a picture of Will with a bullet hole in his head and a gun, and he says this is a dead man and he used this gun. He says it was suicide and he shot himself, and there was no intruder, there was no knife. Abby says he's not that man and he wouldn't do that to their family, and she says she's a psychologist. She would have known if he was planning on doing this. And Abel tells her that she can't blame herself for not knowing what was going on inside of someone else's head.
I kind of thought this line was kind of unintentionally funny because she is a psychologist and her whole thing is supposed to be figuring out what's going on in people's minds, but that's also a super not helpful way to think about it. Just because you are a professional in that field doesn't mean you would always see signs and symptoms of someone who was about who wanted to die of suicide. And I think that ultimately might be why she can't accept this. Like, I should have known, but I didn't, so I just reject the entire premise.
Right. And in this scene too, I believe Abel says, you don't know what he didn't tell you. So like, had he been fully transparent with her, she probably could have figured it out, but she didn't see the signs. And sometimes you just don't. Sometimes life just doesn't work that way. So August says he's going to ask her one last time what happened to Ashley. Abby looks at Abel and says, you know what happened. You experienced it. You came back, but she didn't. Abel just looks at her. So she looks at August and says, something took her. August kind of gives up in this moment, and he says, it's difficult to go back over the line from fiction to reality. You can't just stop being insane whenever you want to be. It's the kind of thing that really stays with you forever.
Which, no, it isn't. A psychologist is not ever going to say anything like this. So if we're to believe that's how this character truly views Abby, I think he just specifically thinks that she is a lost cause.
Right. Like, there's clearly people can have breaks and come back. It happens all the time. But yeah, he's given up on Abby in this moment.
Yeah, he's on Team Ronnie at this point.
Right? Yes, he's definitely Team Ronnie. It cuts to real Abby, and the director asks if Will's death was a suicide. She says yes. And he says, well, with that credibility, how can she expect that the audience and him to believe what she's saying? And she's saying that what she experienced wasn't hallucinations. It's just how she dealt with the hard truth. She then said that the recordings don't lie. She says Tommy is dead, Scott's back is broken, and Ashley is gone. These are hard facts. The director says they do appear to be, and then she gets really mad and she says, God damn it, they are. And she says she has to keep hope alive, and she has to believe that what she's doing will help. And she has to believe that because she has to believe that Ashley is still alive somewhere, and there's a chance that she will get to see her and hold her again. They end the interview and the camera cuts out, and we see that Abby is very sick looking and in a wheelchair while she's doing this interview. The movie ends with another spinning forest scene like we got in the beginning of the movie, and it's the director this time, and he says someone else is interested in Nome too. Since the 1960s, there have been 2,000 visits from the FBI to Nome, the highest in Alaska. It then cuts to Mila Jovovich. She says the second most visited is Anchorage, which has a population 76 times larger than Nome, and the FBI has visited there 353 times. And they both say, in the end, what you believe is yours to decide. And is any of that true?
I don't think it's true. And I actually reached out to a mutual friend of ours who works in crime statistics. She pointed me to some databases to kind of poke around into. I'm not a statistician, but from what I could tell, this does not appear to be true at all. But the good news for those of us who aren't mathologists, I don't think you need to look into it to know that what she just said is completely made up, because the FBI has a field office in Anchorage and has had that field office since 1944. So they wouldn't visit Anchorage. They live there. They do not, however, have one in Nome, Alaska. So they would visit there. So saying that the FBI visits Nome more than it visits Anchorage is like saying I visit my sisters more often than I visit my own house. It's like I don't visit my house. I live there.
Right, that's true. Oh, that's an interesting point. I didn't even think about the fact that the FBI might like have an office in Anchorage.
Yeah,
So
they do.
yeah.
And that's why I almost called their office today. Because I went to double check this and I couldn't find it online, and I finally found it. I was like, they've been there since 1944.
I kind of wish you would have just to be like, hey, I'm investigating a movie, and could you just give me the facts of how many times you visited Nome, Alaska? They would probably be like, Jesus Christ, we get this call once a week.
That's exactly why I really didn't want to call them. I was like, I'm just going to poke around and a little bit more and see if I can find. Like I dialed the first 6 numbers of the phone number. And then I was like, let me check one more thing. And then I found it.
That's so funny. I bet they do get that call. If I worked up there with the FBI, I would giggle every time somebody called. And I would have like a little script of facts ready just in case.
The temptation to mess with people would be too much. I wouldn't do well.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, that would be tough too. So after this, we get a closing credit sequence, and it says that Dr. Abel Campos continues to practice psychology in Alaska. He refused to comment and participate in this film. Dr. Otosami has since attained tenure at a prestigious Canadian university. He assisted with a Sumerian translation, though declined any further involvement. He corroborates Dr. Tyler's testimony. Sheriff August retired 2 years after the incidents and currently resides in northern Alaska. He rejected any and all involvement in this film. Now, 22-year-old Ronnie Tyler remains estranged from Dr. Tyler. He continues to blame her for Ashley's disappearance. And then Dr. Tyler was eventually cleared of all allegations against her, including the disappearance of her daughter. She has since relocated to the east coast of the U.S., and then due to her deteriorating condition, she remains bedridden under constant medical supervision. She continues to assert that Ashley was taken by non-human intelligences. Ashley has never been found. And then instead of music during the ending credits, we get recordings of various people describing their alien encounters.
And I think I know what these are, which I'll get into here soon.
Ooh, that's exciting. And the movie ends. So we dug into the plot. It's time to dig deeper. Eleanor, what have you unearthed for us in Nome, Alaska, and perhaps even farther beyond?
All right, I am going to dig into the real life story of the disappearances in Nome, the backstory of this whole ancient Sumerian thing, the controversy with this film, and what Americans think about UFOs and aliens. And you know what? Why not? Let's add a couple cases of people saying they were abducted by aliens to this. So first, the disappearances. The disappearances and deaths in Nome were real. And the FBI did look into this. In 2006, they looked into 24 specific cases of missing persons and suspicious deaths that had all taken place in Nome since 1966. So that's 24 people in 40 years. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when we're not talking about a huge population, so you can see why it concerned people. These cases were folks who either went missing and then were found dead later with either little or no trauma to their bodies, or were never found at all. The FBI concluded that although there was at least one murder with a known culprit, most of these cases were people who were exposed to the very harsh elements, many of whom were drinking very heavily at the time. So these are people who were a little too drunk to be walking home in the brutal climate with the brutal geography and the bitterly cold ocean currents and winds. It's really not hard to see these tragedies happening for these reasons and not for aliens. I should also note the indigenous population in Alaska is overrepresented in many missing persons cases. I found an article from the Nome Nuggets, a publication in Nome, Alaska, and this is from last year, and it was about the march they had on May 5th, which is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Peoples Day, which I will also link.
Yeah, and so I know about, and I don't know if I know it because of this movie or where I learned this, but I do know that Alaska in general has like especially some of these northern areas, because of like the daylight and the climate and things like that, there's a pretty widespread drinking and substance abuse issue throughout Alaska. So that definitely influences like these missing person cases and how there might be more of them up there, like you alluded to before. And yeah, with the Indigenous people thing, that's definitely something to look into. So if you're living on the edge of the wilderness in the freezing cold, I think it makes sense for a lot of people to go missing, especially then when you mix in substance abuse and things like that. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and even if you're not abusing any substances, if you are just a little bit too, like you've grown up in this area, so like, I'll be fine, I'll make it home, and you're a little too tipsy to be walking home in the very dark, in the wind, in the snow, like this is not difficult to understand. It's tragic. And the fact that whether there's substance abuse or not, the fact that Indigenous folks are more likely to be, missing or murdered, that's tragic and needs to be looked into. But I think the reality of this is scarier even than saying it's probably aliens.
Yeah, I agree. Something like this happened in my hometown where I grew up too. I grew up right off Lake Erie, which has like huge lake effect snow. And there's a street of bars downtown that people go to and get drunk all the time. And it's not far from the lake. And one night someone just got too drunk and wandered off and just died of hypothermia in a snowbank. And it took a couple days to find him. So this wasn't in the wilderness. It was like just right off downtown. So yeah, this kind of thing, it could very easily happen.
Yeah, it's tragic, but it isn't a mystery, and it certainly doesn't appear to be aliens. But let's talk a little bit about aliens. Specifically, let's talk about that book about ancient Sumerians and what the writer of this book was trying to say. In that scene where Dr. Tyler finds the phone number in the book, if you pause it, you can read some of the text, which includes references to a cockpit and rockets, the god you mentioned called Anu, and a sentence that says, the primitive culture that existed in cohabitation with their quote-unquote gods did not understand the technology of space travel. They did make representations of what they saw, end quote. And this is under the images of those stone statues. The back of this book talks about the Sumerian language, and it says the book, quote, presents millennial-old evidence of the existence of Nibiru, end quote. So this is all ancient alien astronaut stuff. In reality, in ancient Babylonia, Nibiru likely referred to an equinox. But in 1976, a guy named Zachariah Sitchin wrote a book called The 12th Planet, where he claimed that the gods that the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians called the Anunnaki were actually aliens, extraterrestrials from distant planets who traveled here, though, like for real, man, past the joint. Actual historians say that this guy either deliberately misrepresented Sumerian texts by cutting off translations and highlighting out-of-context texts as his evidence, or that he misunderstood these things so badly that it's impossible to distinguish pure ignorance or actual malice and lies. He's not the only such writer, or there's actually a name for them, pseudo-archaeologist, and he's not the only one out there. It is unfortunately a crowded field. And like we talked about earlier, we have all seen the memes from that one guy on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens TV show. But anyway, I'm highlighting this particular book because it appears to be what the writer of this movie is alluding to.
That's interesting. I'm glad. It's funny because I didn't catch that on the back of the book. He says that the purpose of the book is to prove aliens. Because he, throughout the movie, is like, no, I'm language only. Like, I just study the language. Who knows? I'm not jumping to conclusions. But obviously, he's just looking for anything that could make his book famous. So he really is feeding into the lies that he's giving Abby, which makes him a little kind of gross. It makes him a lot grosser of a character than he originally appeared to be.
Yeah, he's trying to play it straight, like, oh, I'm a serious academic and I'm just studying the language and this is all the evidence and stuff. But it's not. This was invented in 1976. Serious academics ripped this to shreds at the time and ever since. But it's a fun and neat idea. It inspires imagination, and it gives people permission to kind of go, what if the truth is out there? What if they're aliens? So I totally get that appeal. In terms of a fantasy or a sci-fi that thousands of years ago some highly intelligent extraterrestrial visited our ancestors in some way, I think that's a cool concept. Like, if it's a fiction book, I'm all in. I think it's very fun to play around with, But where this kind of harmless fun can get really gross, in my opinion, is when people take it literally. And I think it's actually a thought killer. When something like those ancient alien astronaut books and TV shows, they'll often examine, or they'll say they're examining some like huge or complex structure or monument that ancient people built. And they kind of just go, this was impossible to build at the time. And they scratch their heads and they're like, well, I can't figure it out. Therefore, aliens must have done it. In my opinion, they have effectively stopped their brains. I think it's a lot more compelling to try to study these structures and art and everything that a culture left behind to help us learn more about them and ultimately about humanity in general. And I think it's a real bummer that there are people exploiting what could be just a fun fictional genre and trying to dress it up in academic and scientific words and present it as reality. And I'd be remiss without mentioning it, but this whole pseudo-archaeology thing is deliberately used by some pretty sinister groups to marginalize the accomplishments of people of color. So you can see how awful that becomes pretty quickly. I'm not going to dwell on that here. I'll link an article from Discover Magazine if you want to learn more, and there's definitely been a lot written about the more dark side of pseudo-archaeology.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, I will sit down and watch an alien documentary and enjoy it, but know that 99.9% of what they're saying isn't real. And if anything, I take those, like, we've all watched an alien documentary about how the pyramids were made. Like, we've all been there. And if anything, I watch those documentaries to be like, okay, what are the like real possibilities that the pyramids were built this way, that they're disproving, and then like questioning the facts that they're coming up with and looking into that more. Because like you said, when aliens is a conclusion, it just kind of ends like, oh, okay, the aliens gave us this super thing, not, oh, they were like, they did this cool math thing and leveraged rocks this way or whatever. I think it is fun. I think it's fun in the same way that I would enjoy a documentary about Bigfoot, Nessie, the Mothman, or anything else. Like, I want to believe it. It's fun. It's cool. It lets my brain turn off for a minute, but then I'm going to come back to reality and like, no, that the Nessie's probably not floating around out there as much as I would love her to be.
Right. And the thing too is, it's not as if we don't have answers for a lot of these questions. Like, you know, some of the ancient alien stuff will be like, oh, scientists and historians are still not certain. Like, they might not have found like a dear future generations, here's how we did everything in detailed blueprint, but they have some pretty good ideas. So scientists and historians and academics and people who are experts in their fields are honest about how certain they are about things. And what some of the more cynical people who want to exploit things like this will do is they will focus on whatever little crack of doubt there is, and they'll say, see, you don't know 100%, therefore it could be this other thing. And that can just be like a fun little thought experiment or just like a fun fantasy, or it can be somebody with some pretty sinister intent. And I think people should be aware about that when they're specifically engaging with this element of extraterrestrial, you know, ancient, alien, whatever.
Yes, I agree. Definitely watch out for the grifters and watch out for the underlying narrative that you're being sold when you consume some of this stuff. But besides that, enjoy. That's my stance.
Yeah. So in this movie, other than constantly insisting that the events in the movie were real and weaving in supposedly real archived footage and audio recordings and dash cams and everything else, the people who made this movie made some other very, let's call them bold choices. So let's talk about this controversy. For one, they made a website for Dr. Abigail Tyler, complete with a biography for a doctor by that name who studies sleep disorders in Nome, Alaska.
That's nuts. My eyes are huge right now. Like, they just bulged out of my head. I knew that this movie got slapped and like got a lawsuit for its marketing, but I didn't realize they went this far to make a fake website for a fake doctor. That's crazy.
You're making big old gray man eyes right now, are you?
I am.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty intense too, and there's more. So the website itself no longer works, but I found a Gizmodo article written about it at the time that describes it in detail. It was called the Alaska Psychiatry Journal, and it was basically just a collection of articles about sleep studies, but it had no contact information or any of the other things that you might expect to see on a medical journal's website. Now, you would think this would be enough, but nope, not for these folks. They made another website, this one called Alaska News Archive, which features a fake story about Dr. Tyler moving to Nome, but they use the name of a real news outlet and a real editor.
This is crazy. I know I Googled this movie after I saw it, and I didn't find any of this. Thank God, because I think I would have spiraled into some deep. This is dangerous. I don't like it. I don't like it.
Oh gosh, I have to tell you so I had never seen this movie and my husband had never seen it either. So when I was like, "Do you want to sit down and watch this movie?" I've never seen it. He's like, "Yeah, sure." We got 30 minutes into it. He pulled out his phone. I don't know exactly what he looked up, but he searched it and he looked at me and he said, "You're going to hate this movie." And then he left and he didn't come back.
I knew you would hate this movie.
I'm going to say I didn't hate it. There's things I
That's fair.
definitely don't like about it. And I'm going to talk about this more later, but
Okay.
what they did it's just baffling to me. Okay, so I told you about the using a real news outlet, but that's not all. There was also in this same website a fake obituary for Dr. Tyler's husband and fake news articles about his death. But again, they made it look like they were published by a real Alaskan news outlet called the Nome Nugget, which I mentioned earlier, and some of their actual writing was used as sources for this episode. So when this happened, the real publisher of the Nome Nugget, Nancy McGuire, saw her name and saw her paper on this fake site. She called the website and demanded that they take it down. She says the webmaster demanded that she send him ID to prove she really was from the Nome Nugget. So this is definitely crossing some lines, right?
I was going to ask you if these real people knew that they were being used, like that their names were being used. And oh my gosh, that's nuts. They didn't even know? No wonder they got sued.
Yeah, right? Like it wasn't just, let's make a fun website that sort of kind of looks like a news. It's like, no, let me find the name of a real news outlet in that town, use that and put somebody's real name on it and make it look like she published this.
My goodness. I knew you would not like the fact that this movie pretended to be real when it wasn't. And I was here to like defend it, saying it took some artistic liberties. But this is too much. This is too far.
Yeah. You could call it a bold artistic choice.
It's something.
Yeah, you could also just call it lies that will get you sued. So,
yes.
And again, that's not all. I watched an interview with Alicia Seton. She's the actress who played Cindy, Scott's wife. She said that the film crew, when the actors showed up, the film crew gave all the actors binders full of what they were told were transcripts of real phone calls of people who were experiencing some kind of alien encounter. And it had burned CDs of audio files of these recordings. And I think that is what we actually hear while the credits are rolling. And no, I don't think they're real.
I'm over here gasping. This is insane. I am dumbfounded. They were basically LARPing. They were LARPing aliens are real without even knowing it, which is live action role playing for those of you out there who aren't nerds. Good for you. But this is nuts. Because what? Oh, now I have to research this director because I know he's done some other movies. I can't believe he wasn't like blacklisted after this. This is crazy.
Do you know how hard I tried to find an interview with this man where he talks about this movie? It either doesn't exist or I'm worse at this job than I thought.
No, I was going to ask that because I'm like, well, what was he saying? Because if you're having interviews like to the movie's build up, what could he possibly say in those interviews? Yeah, this is 100% real. You at that point, you're just setting yourself up. Like, you can't do that. This is nuts.
That's why I included the bit about the interview with the actor, because I couldn't find anything from the director at all. There are interviews with this director, but he works with one of the Star Trek TV shows, so you can find him talking about that. He's not talking about this movie, or at least not that I can find.
This is nuts. I'm going to find one. I have to find one.
I hope you do. I tried really hard. Listen, I changed my browser settings so that it only looked for articles from like 2009 to 14. Like surely during that time period, maybe nothing. I can't find anything.
No, I believe that you researched this thoroughly. You almost called the FBI offices up in Anchorage. Like, I know you researched.
I want to say the show's changed me, but that's not it. The show has given me a place to channel my weird, and it's fun.
It's unleashed the real Eleanor onto the world. I love it.
But again, that's not all. While we don't have an interview with this director, I did learn that at the screening for this movie when it first came out, he passed out a fact sheet in which he claimed that he learned about the disappearances that were going to be talked about in the movie from a friend back in 2004 who told him about Dr. Tyler's research and the incident and everything happening in Nome. I couldn't find a copy of this, but I found a CNN article from 2009 that talks about it. And they note in that article, first-time writer-director Olatunde Asanami was unavailable for comment. And yep, I bet he was.
Holy cow. I am so glad that I was not aware of any of this, because had I been in that movie theater and given that handout and watched this movie, I think I would have been sent into a full psychosis. No, thank you. This is nuts. Ugh.
Yeah, they put a lot into it to make it believable. It's insane.
This movie needs to be studied. It needs to be, I'm curious who this movie spiraled and what were the long-term effects, if any, from these false claims. I'm curious.
Well, I think those folks on Reddit who say they smell burnt cinnamon when they are abducted by aliens, I think that's an indicator. It can't be the only thing, but
yes, I believe you that at some point someone saw this movie and then ingrained that in the back of their mind and then had what they believed was an alien encounter and put in the smell of putrid cinnamon because of this movie. I do believe that. That's crazy.
And we're going to talk about an example of that from earlier in history, but I'll get to that in a minute. In this same article from CNN that I mentioned, the journalist talked with the mayor of Nome, Alaska at the time. Her name was Mayor Denise Mickles, who sounds furious. She told CNN that all of the talk of the Nome disappearances was just, quote, Hollywood hooey, end quote. She went on to say that people really needed to understand that the movie was a science fiction thriller and that the town, as a result, was being inundated with phone calls and everybody was just tired of it. She said, some of the calls I'm just ignoring because the issue we had to deal with in real life was very sensitive. The movie is portraying something like the Blair Witch Project, and we're just hoping the message gets out that this is supposed to be for entertainment.
Look, I'm not the only one who thinks this is Blair Witch. This was my Blair Witch, and I'm glad I didn't call anyone. I'm glad a quick Google search put me on the right path. But yeah, I can totally see how this would trip up a ton of people. And you know what? I'm glad people called to ask, to verify instead of just taking it as face value. But to be the person on the other end of those phone calls, that would be really, really annoying and awful.
Yeah, and what I've read about Nome, Alaska, it strikes me as a very no-nonsense town. So I feel for those folks. And I bet they probably still deal with a little bit of it.
I'm sure, yeah, because it's a small town, a small community, probably before this movie, relatively unknown. And to just be thrown on the map like this with no warning whatsoever, that has to be a weird, because they're kind of secluded up there, doing their own thing. And then to be put in the center of, culture for a minute, nobody asked for that. They didn't ask for that.
No. Not at all. Now, while fans or concerned watchers of the movie were calling the mayor of Nome, Alaska, you know who else was getting phone calls? That's right, lawyers. Because like you mentioned, there was a lawsuit over this. Universal Pictures did settle out of court, and I don't think they paid that much money, in my opinion. They ended up paying $20,000 to the Alaska Press Club and another $2,500 donation to a scholarship fund for a local scholarship, and then also a donation to a homeless shelter.
That's pennies. That's nothing, especially to a big production company like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think it was enough. It probably could have gotten a lot worse, but also I'm sure resource-wise, Universal Pictures probably had more cash to make this more painful on that small Alaska town. So this movie definitely had some weird choices when it came to telling a fictional story while insisting frequently that it was real. But this movie resonated and terrified a lot of people. So why is that? Let's talk about some numbers about how common belief in UFOs and aliens and stuff like that is, at least here in the US. But before we get into it, I got to ask you, Charlie, what is your take? Are we the only intelligent life in the universe? Have we been visited by something more? Will we ever be?
So I do believe that there is other intelligent life in the universe. Because if you subscribe to the scientific belief that the universe is infinite, then there's an infinite number of planets and therefore an infinite number of possibilities for life on those planets and therefore an infinite number of other intelligent life. So it exists out there somewhere. What it looks like, what it is, if it's more humans, if it's something else, if it's a little being, I don't know. But have they contacted us? Are they here? I think generally I don't think they are. And if they are here, I'm definitely a subscriber of the ant farm alien theory, which is like if something had enough intelligence to find us and then travel to us, they're not messing with us. Like, they're too smart. And to us, we're just like a bunch of ants in a little ant farm, and they're probably observing us, maybe taking some notes and letting us be on our way, going on about our business. I don't think they're certainly not in Nome, Alaska, sucking up people's daughters that offend them. Like, they're not messing with people like that in any concrete way. So if they're here, I think they're just chilling, watching, but probably not. I don't think they're actually here.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on the infinite universe, infinite possibilities thing. I think something is probably out there, or it probably was, or it probably will be. And I think by the time any contact could occur, I think our planet will have been boiled to nothing. And maybe one day an actual alien archaeologist in the future will be digging up all our dusty bones and pondering our weird artifacts and carvings and speculating like about what we believed and if we ever got to visit them. But if they are here, I hope they liked the show and will subscribe to our Patreon for only $5 a month in Earthling dollars.
Oh my God. I want an alien subscriber. Come find us.
So it sounds like both you and I are open to the idea that there could be something out there. Maybe we're not being visited right now. And you and I are not alone. Pew Research put out a poll in 2021 that says most Americans believe some type of intelligent life exists in the universe other than us. And that's about 65%. And about half say that reports of UFOs, or what are now called UAPs, the unidentified aerial phenomenon, are probably real evidence of intelligent life outside of Earth. And about the same amount of people say they're not a threat to U.S. national security. So most Americans think, yeah, there's probably something. About half of Americans say those UFO reports are probably evidence of it. And about the same amount say it's not a big deal as far as national security.
That's fair. I think that's rational. And here's the thing about UAPs or UFOs, whatever you want to call them. I think like there are obviously UAP sightings. There's photos out there. There's things that exist. It's just a question of what are those? Like there's so many. It could be a natural phenomenon. It could be some person flying a drone that just like looks weird. It could be maybe some governments experimenting with some kind of flying something or another that we just don't know about, and we saw it in the air and it was weird. Like it could be so many things. It doesn't have to be aliens. I think there's definitely things flying in the air that are unidentified, but that doesn't mean that they're aliens. I think there's probably actually more fun answers to what a lot of them are.
Yeah, there was that whole weather balloon debacle that happened a few years ago.
Oh, the weather balloons. That was so much fun.
Yeah.
I was working in a place where that actually caused a little bit of a little bit of a panic for like 10 minutes, and then it all calmed down.
It was a fun panic. Another interesting thing, if you are into numbers and stats and specifically how they can be used or even misused, is I found this article from The Guardian that was published when The Fourth Kind came out, and it talked about this. In 1992, a UFOologist, which is apparently a thing, surveyed 6,000 American adults about specific unusual experiences, or which he claimed were indicators of alien abduction. So here are the symptoms. Waking up paralyzed with a sense of a strange person or presence or something else in the room. Experiencing a period of time of an hour or more in which you were apparently lost, but you could not remember why or where you had been. Feeling that you were actually flying through the air, although you didn't know how or why. Seeing unusual lights or balls of lights in a room without knowing what was causing them or where they came from. And lastly, finding puzzling scars on your body that neither you or anyone else remember how you received them or where you got them. So how many of these symptoms have you ever had, Charlie?
I have definitely, without a doubt, had the puzzling scars. I actually have scratches pop up on my back regularly, and to the point where I'm like, am I possessed by a demon? I don't know, but I'm like, hey bro, let's hang out. I guess you're scratching my back. Besides that, the light thing maybe, but not too many of these things actually, because I haven't had sleep paralysis. Have you had any of them?
I've thought I saw a weird light. I think it was just a trick of the light. I mean, I think everybody's probably had that. I have scars. I don't know where they came from. I don't know, like, unless you count like a road trip where you like blink and suddenly you're much further along in the road than you thought you were. I don't think I've had like hours where I don't remember where I was, and I've never felt like I was flying, but I've definitely had sleep paralysis, like we mentioned.
I was gonna say, yeah, I've definitely had the experience where like I'm cross stitching and I blink and I only thought it was 10 minutes, but it's been 3 hours. But it's because I've disassociated, which is my favorite pastime.
I've had that experience writing for the show. It's becoming a joke with my husband. I'm like, I think I need an hour and a half. 3 hours later.
I do that when I make shorts. I'm like, I only put in like 15 minutes a day into making shorts. 3 hours later. Whoops.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's so much fun. And I'm clearly not being abducted by aliens during that time because there's something to show for it on the other end. But according to this guy, if you said yes to 4 or more of those symptoms, you were probably abducted by aliens. So, surprise, new information for you, I guess. And here's what's interesting. Apparently, and the reason it's in this Guardian article is apparently the authors said that 2% of their respondents fit the criteria. So if you extended that 2% to the American population at the time, it would have been 3.7 million. So if you ever see a quote about 2% of the population believing that they've been abducted by aliens, this is probably where that came from. The question wasn't, do you believe you were abducted by aliens? The question was, have you ever experienced these symptoms? And if you checked yes to 4 or more, the authors said you were probably abducted by an alien. So that's where that 2% number comes, which I thought was really interesting. An interesting example of statistics being used to advance a narrative and kind of dishonestly.
I think this is interesting because now I'm curious what percentage of Americans are epileptic or have experienced seizures, because that's what a lot of these are. Like that, like if you've had a seizure, you're checking more than 4 of these boxes. So,
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Along with many other conditions and symptoms and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting use of statistics for a narrative.
Mhm. And it is kind of neat because some of what these characters in the movie are describing absolutely sounds like sleep paralysis or other disorders like epilepsy or something else that you mentioned. Unfortunately, I never got to see a beautiful owl like they did. I only saw a vaguely annoyed looking raven.
Oh man, I think I'd take the raven over the owl. I want an annoyed raven staring at me. I don't know why that appeals to my subconscious.
So why not? Let's wrap up and have some fun talking about alien encounter claims. So this, I think, is a famous one. This one is known as the Betty and Barney Hill incident. The story goes that in 1961, the couple were driving in New Hampshire at night, and they saw what they first thought was a falling star, but it was moving really strangely, so they stopped to look at it. And then they saw this flying saucer thing descend on their car. Barney says he saw 11 humanoids on board who managed to communicate with him and tell him to stay still but to keep watching. The couple got scared and sped away, but they say they heard a beeping noise and that they woke up later in a different area miles from where they had been. Afterwards, they reported this to both the nearby police and Air Force authorities. They claimed to have seen figures with big black eyes and grayish skin. And afterwards, they had weird dreams and other strange experiences for quite some time. They tried recovering more memories of their encounters under hypnosis, and that actually may have made them recover, quote unquote, recover memories of depictions of aliens from sci-fi movies and TV shows. Have you heard about this incident? Do you remember it?
Yes, I have. I'm pretty sure I've listened to a couple podcast episodes specifically about this incident, though I don't remember which ones. But every time I think about these, my first question is, 1, what did they get out of this? Like, did they get publicity? Did they get something out of this experience? 2, were there drugs involved? So I don't know with Betty and Barney, though. I don't remember if any of those things are true. And I remember like wanting to believe them and believing that they think that they saw something, but they were misremembering or something happened to make it weird. But I have heard of this one.
And it was 1961, so the idea that they might have been having a fun time on an acid trip, road trip, I don't know. That's not entirely far-fetched.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to look into this one more. It's been a while since I heard about it, but I do like these stories, and I don't know. It's interesting.
It is. This one I think is like one of the classics because I think it is when you think about an alien abduction story in the U.S. from before cell phones were a thing. I think this is probably the one a lot of people think about because Barney died, I think, not too long after this of a brain aneurysm, I believe, but Betty went on to be like a UFO darling. Like she went off and did the conferences or the circuit or whatever. So
See, so she got something out of it. But that's what, yeah, I think this Betty and Barney is like basically the alien version of like Amityville Horror. Like what Amityville Horror did for hauntings, Betty and Barney did for aliens.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then I'll do one more. This one was known as the Travis Walton incident. This man was reported missing by fellow members of his logging crew on November 5th in 1975. The crew said that they had seen an unusual light as they were driving from their work site, and they stopped to observe it. They said Travis got out of the truck and was immediately hit by a beam of light, which caused him to collapse. So these tough, rugged men all fled because they thought he was dead. There was a search party sent out, and 5 days later, a very disheveled Travis called his sister from a phone booth in a nearby town. He was examined and seemed confused about what happened. Travis would later claim that he had lost consciousness when he was hit by that beam of light, and he awoke in a hospital kind of room, and there were 3 short, bald creatures with him. He says he tried to fight them, but then a human in a helmet of some sort brought him into another room where he blacked out. And he says he remembers nothing else until he found himself walking on the side of the road days later. But the funniest part of this entire thing. So Travis was known, and I think some of his friends were known as UFO enthusiasts. And there's a theory that the logging crew came up with this story because they were behind schedule on their big logging project. And an alien abduction would count as an act of God for insurance purposes, and they'd be able to get out of a huge financial penalty that they were about to be liable for.
See, this is what I say. When you hear these stories, what do they get out of it? I love that. I think that's so funny. And the guy who pretended to be abducted by aliens got like a 5-day vacation wherever he chose to hold up and do his thing. So I bet that's what happened. I bet they were like, oh man, what are we going to do? Let's just make sure he gets abducted by aliens.
You can imagine them coming up with it as kind of a joke at first. Like, well, our insurance policy says an alien abduction counts as an act of God. And they're just like all looking at each other. They're like, oh, I've got an idea.
I love that. That's so funny.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking was like, well, maybe this guy, maybe Travis just got hit in the head on the works, like in an injury accident and got knocked out. And all the guys that were with him just like left him. And he was like in a coma having this experience and then woke up out of the coma a couple days later with no help and then went home. And then all the other guys were like, oh man, we're going to totally get busted for hitting Travis over the head. And they're like, just say you got abducted by aliens. It's fine.
I'm sure the truth is out there. And this, Charlie, is what I dug up for us today. And I have to say, I'm glad that patrons picked this one because I'd never seen it. I didn't know about the controversy and the lawsuit. And I think this brings up really good questions. Like, how do you do this type of art well? And how do you do it in such a way that kind of plays with that line between reality and fiction, but maybe do it without getting sued? And also now, like in an era of media illiteracy and fake news and AI deep fakes, like, should that kind of art even be getting made right now? Like, what are the ethics here? Like, there's some really interesting questions that this movie has made me think about.
Yeah, me too. I think my personal line, well, first off, we've discussed how we think AI, it shouldn't be involved in the creative process at all. So keep that out of our movies and things like that. But in the pretending to be real, I love a found footage movie. I love to give myself permission to believe in something for an hour or two that I wouldn't normally believe in and then come back to reality. But I think there's definitely some lines where, one, you can't use real people and their identities without talking to those people beforehand and getting permission to do so. Two, I do think this movie took it to a spot where this could really mess up some people. I think this took it too far to a point where if there's someone who is already having hallucinations or some sort of mental illness or instability, this could have fed into that and really hurt some people out there. So I don't love that because they took it too far. If you go home and you hit the wrong websites and you Google that could really spiral you into a psychosis. I'm thinking from my own perspective, I could have been spiraled into a psychosis at the young age of 17 due to this one. So I think that's a little too much. And then if you're exploiting real life tragedies, that's not for me. If someone did murder their whole family and you're saying they did that because aliens, no, that's not okay. But yeah, so there's definitely some lines here and some good discussions to be had from this movie. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, well, didn't Blair Witch do this exact thing? Like there was controversy around that. And it's kind of true. I know they had that missing persons flyer, but that marketing campaign to try to get people to think, is this real? Isn't it real? Whatever. But I'm sure when we do our episode, we'll talk about this. But the flyer for the missing persons that was produced as kind of like a marketing thing for the movie, it had a fake phone number on it. So it was pretty easy to figure out quickly that this was not real. And they weren't out there pretending to be an actual news organization and putting somebody else's name to news articles about it. So I do think it's a little different how they did it. But when we do that episode, I'm sure we'll talk about that more and see if we still feel that way at the end.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to kind of explore and go into. But all right, so on that note, what did we decide what we dug up today? Is it horror? Is it tragedy? Is it something else? What do you think?
Okay, I'm actually going to give you two answers. My first answer was my initial reaction upon first seeing this, and then I'll give you the one for how I view it now that I have more context. At no point in this movie did I think this was real, audio and video footage. But what I thought was going on is that the story they were telling about a psychiatrist who went through something awful and the other strange and sad things happening in Nome, Alaska, meant that something at least very similar had happened to someone. So when the movie ended, I thought this was the saddest thing ever. I thought a doctor lost her husband to suicide, couldn't cope, and maybe went a little off the rails with some of her patients and started projecting her own overwhelming grief onto them to the point that she either literally made one of, or at least influenced one of her patients so that his condition got worse and he killed his own family. Or even if that's not the case, maybe he just happened to be under her care. And when he murdered his family, then she needed something to blame on it. Like she felt guilty or felt like she could have stopped it and couldn't, or felt like she should have been able to stop it. And the fact that she didn't meant that she needed something to blame it on, just like she needed something to blame for her husband dying. And I thought that kind of explained why her friends were kind of playing along with her delusion, like trying to kind of guide her out of it until she could face it. And then I thought on top of all that, either her daughter was abducted by a human or was lost in the Alaskan wilderness, or maybe she even harmed her daughter herself because of her descent into mental illness. So I thought that's what they were doing with the son and the way that he reacted to her. I thought I was going to look this up and it was going to be a really dark, awful story that was going to absolutely bum me out. I'm glad that it wasn't, but my initial reaction was, this is a tragedy. This is the saddest thing I've ever seen. Now that I know what it is, it's definitely a sci-fi horror, and it's a sci-fi horror that made some bizarre choices both artistically and also in their promotion of it.
That's so nuts that was your first reaction of it. And I agree that if that was what I thought the first time I saw this movie, it's so sad. Like if this was something that really happened, and that would be so tragic. But yeah, no, I didn't think that at all. But I like that line of thinking. I mean, that's crazy. That really adds some, that is what they kind of get to at the end, right? In this fake story, but there's nothing real about any of it. So yes, I'm glad that is not fact. I'm glad that is not real.
Yeah, I guess I just couldn't see why would you be constantly telling me this is a real story that really happened unless there wasn't some story that involved a psychiatrist and her family and something awful happening. So I thought I was going to read about this and it was going to be a real tragedy that was just being exploited in a very weird way. And I'm glad it wasn't, but I still have some questions about the decisions that were made here.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't that too. And it's funny because you came at this with a rational adult brain and you were trying to justify why they were writing this movie the way that they did. And then it turned out that there was no justification to it in the end. But I agree with your final conclusion that this is just a sci-fi horror. I think if you take away all the questionable, like this is real stuff that they did with this movie, I do think that they did a good job of taking aliens and turning them into a horror. Because it's almost like aliens meet a haunting, because we talked about how it kind of blends the lines of like a haunted house and being possessed and demons and things like that. Like it almost is there, but it's aliens. And I don't think there's a lot of other movies that subtly do like alien hauntings like that. And so I think it's kind of cool. It's unique in that way that it is a true sci-fi horror, but like it's almost like a classic haunted story, but aliens instead of ghosts. And I think that's fun.
Yeah, I think that's a cool a cool and different approach, especially when you had the setup of the family being very religious. So like the fact that they interpreted everything that was happening to them as being aliens and not a possession or something demonic or something that aligns with their religious worldview. I thought that was really interesting that they set that up, but that's not what happens in the movie. So I did appreciate the novelty there.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely an interesting movie, a unique one, and yeah, but a sci-fi horror in the end. I agree with you there.
All right. So before we put down the shovels for today, what are we going to dig into next week?
Next week, we will dig into the 2024 film Longlegs.
I can't wait.
It's going to be a fun one. Okay, so that does it for us today, listeners. May the horrors persist.
And Zimabu Eter! Zimabu Eter! Thanks for listening to Horror Sandbox. No generative AI was used in the making of this podcast. For show notes, credits, and contact info, check out our website, horrorsandbox.com. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Horror Sandbox. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/horrorsandbox. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with all the horror fans in your life.